The Great Hall of the Velkorian High Council was the largest room in the known galaxy. Its walls stretched upward for nearly 1,000 feet, covered in gold and precious stones from 100 conquered worlds. Massive pillars of black crystal held up the ceiling, and floating platforms carried observers from dozens of species who had come to watch the historic moment. At the center of it all sat Supreme Commander Zelthos on his throne of living crystal. He was old, even by Velkorian standards. His gray skin had turned almost silver with age, and his 4 eyes glowed with the cold light of someone who had seen empires rise and fall. Behind him stood his generals, his advisors, and his priests. They wore armor made from metals that humans had not yet discovered, and they carried weapons that could level cities. The Velkorian Empire had ruled this part of the galaxy for 12,000 years. They had conquered 47 species. They had never lost a war. They had never even come close to losing a war. Their fleets numbered in the tens of thousands. Their armies counted in the billions. When they spoke, the galaxy listened. Today, they were going to speak to humanity. The doors at the far end of the hall opened slowly. Every eye in the chamber turned to watch the human delegation enter. There were only 3 of them. They walked across the polished floor, their footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Compared to the Velkorians, who stood 8 feet tall and had 4 arms, the humans looked small and fragile. Ambassador Jake Morrison walked at the front of the group. He was 52 years old, with gray hair at his temples and lines around his eyes that came from years of smiling. He wore a simple gray suit with a blue tie. No armor, no weapons, just a suit, a tie, and a folded newspaper tucked under his arm. Behind him walked his aide, Amy Reyes, a young woman with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. She carried a small briefcase and wore an expression of professional calm. The third member of the delegation was a translator, though Jake spoke enough Velkorian to get by. The humans stopped at the base of the throne platform. Jake looked up at the Supreme Commander and smiled politely, as if he had just walked into a business meeting. "Ambassador Morrison," Zelthos said, his voice booming through the hall. "Do you know why you have been summoned?" Jake tilted his head. "I have a general idea. Yes. Then let us not waste time." Zelthos rose from his throne. He was impressive when seated, but standing, he was terrifying. His shadow fell over the humans like a dark cloud. "The Velkorian Empire has been patient with your species. We have given you opportunities to join us peacefully. We have offered you protection. We have asked only for reasonable tribute and territorial concessions." Jake nodded slowly but said nothing. "You have refused every offer," Zelthos continued. "You have ignored our diplomats. You have rejected our terms. You have shown nothing but disrespect for the greatest power in the galaxy." The generals behind the throne shifted, their armor clicking softly. The observers on the floating platforms leaned forward. This was the moment they had all come to see. "Therefore," Zelthos declared, raising all 4 of his arms, "the Velkorian Empire hereby declares total war upon the human species. Your worlds will burn, your fleets will be destroyed, your people will learn the price of defiance. This is your final warning. Surrender now, or face complete annihilation." The hall fell completely silent. Every being in the room stared at the tiny human ambassador, waiting to see his reaction. Would he fall to his knees? Would he beg for mercy? Would he cry out in fear? Jake Morrison chuckled. It was a soft sound, almost gentle. He reached under his arm, pulled out the folded newspaper, and opened it. Then, he began to read. The silence stretched on. Zelthos stared down at the human, his 4 eyes blinking in confusion. His generals exchanged uncertain glances. The observers whispered to each other. No one knew what to make of this. "Human," Zelthos said, his voice now sharp with anger. "Did you hear what I said?" Jake looked up from the newspaper, adjusting a pair of reading glasses that he had pulled from his pocket. "Oh yes. War, annihilation, burning worlds. I heard you." He smiled apologetically. "I was just checking the sports section. My daughter Lily has a softball game this week, and I wanted to see if the schedule was printed." Amy Reyes coughed softly, hiding what might have been a smile. Zelthos stepped forward, his massive form looming over the ambassador. You dare to mock the Valkorian Empire? You dare to read a newspaper while I declare the destruction of your species? Jake folded the newspaper neatly and tucked it back under his arm. With respect, Supreme Commander, I am not mocking anyone. I simply have my priorities in order. He looked up at the alien without any trace of fear. My daughter's softball game matters to me. Your declaration of war, while certainly dramatic, is not something I find particularly concerning. A murmur ran through the hall. Several of the alien observers made sounds of shock. One of the Valkorian generals actually laughed, though he stopped quickly when Zelthos glared at him. Not concerning? Zelthos repeated. We have 800 warships ready to enter your solar system. We have armies that have never known defeat. We have weapons that can crack planets in half. And you are not concerned? Jake smiled again, that same polite, patient smile. Supreme Commander, may I ask you a question? Zelthos hesitated, then nodded slowly. How much do you actually know about humanity? The question hung in the air. Zelthos straightened, his pride clearly wounded. We know enough. You are a young species. You have only recently discovered space travel. You have no significant military history beyond your own primitive conflicts. You are children playing at being adults. Jake nodded thoughtfully. I see. And did your intelligence gatherers happen to study those primitive conflicts you mentioned? We saw no need. Internal disputes among a single species are irrelevant. Ah, Jake glanced at Amy, who opened her briefcase and pulled out a small data device. That was a mistake, Supreme Commander. That was a very serious mistake. He handed the device to one of the Valkorian guards, who looked at it suspiciously before passing it up to the throne platform. Zelthos took it in one of his 4 hands. What is this? He demanded. A gift, Jake said. A brief history of human warfare. Very brief. We could only fit the highlights on a device that size. He clasped his hands behind his back. I suggest you read it before your fleets enter our solar system. It might save you some embarrassment. Without waiting for a response, Jake turned and walked toward the door. Amy fell into step beside him. The translator followed, looking pale. Ambassador Morrison, Zelthos called out. This is not over. Jake paused at the door and looked back over his shoulder. No, Supreme Commander. It really is not. He smiled one last time. I look forward to our next conversation. I think you will find it educational. The doors closed behind him, leaving the Valkorian High Council in stunned silence. Supreme Commander Zelthos did not sleep that night. He sat alone in his private chambers, the small data device resting on the table before him. For hours, he simply stared at it. Part of him wanted to throw it away, to dismiss the human ambassador as a fool, and proceed with the invasion as planned. But something about the way Jake Morrison had smiled bothered him. It was not the smile of a desperate man trying to appear brave. It was the smile of someone who knew something that others did not. Finally, as the twin moons of his homeworld began to set, Zelthos activated the device. The first thing he saw was a number. The device displayed how many wars humanity had fought in just the last 500 years of their history. Zelthos blinked all 4 of his eyes. He checked the translation matrix to make sure there was no error. There was none. The number was correct. The Valkorian Empire had fought 17 wars in 12,000 years. Humanity had fought over 15,000 conflicts in just half a millennium, and those were only the ones large enough to be recorded in their history books. Zelthos felt something cold settle in his stomach. He kept reading. The device showed him images and records from something called the First World War. Humans had fought each other across an entire planet, using weapons that sprayed metal at incredible speeds, poison gases that melted lungs, and explosive devices that could destroy entire buildings. Millions had died. Millions more had been wounded, and when it was over, the humans had not learned peace. Instead, they had learned to build better weapons. Then came something called the Second World War. The numbers were even larger this time. Entire cities had been burned to the ground. Massive ships carried flying machines that dropped fire from the sky. And at the end, The humans had created a weapon so powerful that it could destroy a city with a single explosion. They had used it twice. Zelthos paused the recording. His hands were shaking. The Velkorians had weapons that could crack planets. Yes. But those weapons had taken thousands of years to develop. The humans had gone from riding animals to splitting atoms in less than 50 years. They had done it while fighting the largest war in their history. They had done it because they were fighting the largest war in their history. He continued reading. There were more wars after that. Conflicts in jungles and deserts. Wars fought with flying machines and electronic weapons. Wars that lasted decades. Wars that killed millions. The humans had developed new ways to fight with every generation. They had turned warfare into an art form, then into a science, and then into something even more dangerous. They had turned it into an industry. One section of the device caught his attention. It described something called the Cold War, a period when two human nations had pointed enough weapons at each other to destroy their entire planet several times over. For 40 years, they had lived on the edge of total destruction. They had built machines under the ocean that could launch devastation at any moment. They had created weapons that could burn the sky and poison the earth for centuries, and they had not used them. Not because they did not want to, but because both sides knew that using them would mean the end of everything. The humans had invented the concept of mutual destruction as a strategy for peace. Zelthos turned off the device and sat in the darkness for a long time. The next morning, he called a meeting of his generals. Admiral Korath was there, the commander of the First Fleet that was scheduled to attack Earth. So were the other high-ranking officers who had spent their careers preparing for this moment. There has been a change of plans, Zelthos announced. The generals exchanged confused looks. Admiral Korath stepped forward. Supreme Commander, the fleet is ready. We can depart within the hour. The humans have only a handful of ships. This will be the easiest conquest in our history. Zelthos held up the data device. Have you studied the enemy, Admiral? Of course. They are a primitive species. They have been in space for less than 200 years. Their technology is basic. Their military forces are small. And their history? Their culture? Their approach to warfare? Admiral Korath shrugged, a gesture that looked strange with 4 arms. Such things are unimportant. Victory is determined by numbers and firepower. We have both. They have neither. Zelthos activated the device and projected an image on the wall. It showed a human battlefield from their First World War. Bodies lay in muddy trenches that stretched for miles. The sky was dark, with smoke. Machines of death rolled across the landscape. This is what humans do to each other, Zelthos said quietly. This is what they did to their own species, on their own planet, over territory that could be walked across in a few days. The generals stared at the image in silence. Zelthos changed to another image. It showed a city, or what had once been a city. Everything had been flattened. A strange, mushroom-shaped cloud rose in the background. This is what happened when they decided that a war was taking too long. They built a weapon that could do this. And they used it on civilians. Tens of thousands died in a single flash of light. Admiral Korath's confident expression began to fade. They have been fighting each other since before they had written language, Zelthos continued. They have fought over resources, over religion, over ideas, over pride. They once fought a war because someone killed a member of their ruling class. They once fought a war over a sporting event. They have never stopped fighting. Not for a single generation in their entire history. He turned to face his generals directly. And you want to give them a common enemy? The silence in the room was absolute. General Vask, the oldest of the commanders, spoke first. Supreme Commander. Surely they cannot match our technology. Our shields, our weapons, our ships, perhaps not today, Zelthos agreed. But consider this. They went from wooden ships powered by wind to ships that could cross oceans in days. All in less than a century. They went from messages carried by horses to instant communication across their entire planet in less than 50 years. They went from the first flying machine to landing on their moon in 66 years. He paused. What do you think they will develop when they have access to our technology? No one had an answer. Zelthos sat back in his throne. The invasion will proceed as planned. Admiral Korath, you will take the first fleet to their solar system. But you will not attack until I give the order. And you will not underestimate these humans. They are not prey. They are predators. The most successful predators their planet has ever produced. Admiral Korath nodded slowly, but his eyes showed something that had never been there before. It was not quite fear. Valkorians did not feel fear. But it was close. As the generals filed out, Zelthos remained alone in the chamber. He picked up the data device and looked at it one more time. Somewhere in that collection of records, there was a quote from a human leader. It said that humanity had learned to wage war so well that they now had to learn to wage peace, or face extinction. Zelthos wondered if maybe, just maybe, the Valkorian Empire had made a terrible mistake. The Valkorian First Fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system. 800 warships appeared in perfect formation, their dark hulls blocking out the distant stars. Admiral Korath stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Vengeance, and watched the tactical displays come to life. Report, he ordered. His sensor officer, a young Valkorian named Tessik, worked the console with practiced speed. We have arrived at the designated coordinates. Admiral, the human homeworld is approximately 6 hours away at standard cruising speed. I am detecting significant activity throughout the system. Define significant. Tessik hesitated. Mining operations on multiple asteroid fields. Settlements on several moons. Orbital stations around the fourth planet. And, he paused, checking his readings twice, a large number of power signatures that I cannot identify. Admiral Korath frowned. The intelligence reports had suggested that humans were barely capable of interplanetary travel. Mining operations and moon settlements suggested otherwise. What about military vessels? I am detecting one ship approaching our position, Admiral. Just one. It appears to be broadcasting a communication signal. One ship. Korath allowed himself a small smile. Perhaps the intelligence had been correct after all. On screen. On screen. The main view screen flickered, and a human woman appeared. She wore a dark blue uniform with gold markings on the shoulders. Her hair was short and brown, and her eyes were calm and steady. Behind her, Korath could see the bridge of a human vessel, filled with equipment and crew members who moved with quiet efficiency. Good morning, Admiral, the woman said. I am Captain Beth Holloway of the USS Montana. On behalf of Earth's Unified Defense Command, I would like to welcome you to our solar system. Korath stared at her. The human was smiling as if she were greeting a visiting friend rather than facing an invasion fleet. Captain Holloway, I am Admiral Korath of the Valkorian First Fleet. We are here to deliver justice upon your species for defying the will of the Empire. Yes, we received the declaration of war, Beth replied casually. Very dramatic, by the way. Supreme Commander Zelthos has a real talent for public speaking. You mock us? Not at all. I am simply offering you a chance to reconsider. Beth leaned forward slightly. Admiral, we know why you are here. We know what you intend to do, and we are offering you one opportunity to turn around and go home. No harm done. No hard feelings. Korath laughed. It was a harsh sound. One ship against 800? Human arrogance truly knows no limits. One ship is all we brought to the meeting, Beth said. It would have been rude to bring more without knowing if they were needed. They are not needed. Your single vessel is no threat to us. Beth nodded slowly. Admiral, may I tell you a story? It will only take a moment. Korath was about to refuse, but something made him hesitate. Perhaps it was the memory of the data device that Supreme Commander Zelthos had shown the generals. Perhaps it was the strange calm in the human captain's eyes. Speak quickly. Thank you. Beth clasped her hands behind her back. Many years ago, on our world, there was a great war. One side had a powerful navy that controlled the seas. They seemed unstoppable. But their enemy had been watching, learning, and preparing. At a place called Midway, a small force of defenders faced a massive invasion fleet. She paused, letting the words settle. The defenders won. They won because they knew the enemy was coming. They won because they had prepared. They won because they understood that victory does not always go to the strongest force. Sometimes it goes to the ones who are ready. Admiral Korath felt a chill run down his spine. He pushed it aside. A touching story. But stories will not save you today. No, Beth agreed. But this might. She pressed a button on her console. Every alarm on the Eternal Vengeance screamed to life at once. Korath spun toward the tactical display. And what he saw there made his blood run cold. Ships were appearing everywhere. Not just appearing. Decloaking. They had been there the whole time. Invisible to Velkorian sensors. Waiting in the darkness of space. First, there were dozens. Then, hundreds. Then more than 1,000. Human warships of every size surrounded the Velkorian fleet in a perfect sphere of metal and fire. Destroyers and cruisers formed the inner ring. Massive carriers sat behind them, their hulls bristling with weapons. Weapons platforms drifted at the edges. Their targeting systems already locked onto every Velkorian vessel. "Admiral," Tessic whispered, his voice shaking. "I am counting over 1,500 human vessels. Their weapons are charged and aimed at us." Korath stared at the display. This was impossible. Human technology was supposed to be primitive. They were not supposed to have cloaking systems. They were not supposed to have a fleet this large. They were not supposed to be ready. On the view screen, Captain Holloway smiled gently. "We have been watching you since you entered the outer rim of our system, Admiral. Your ships are fast, but our sensors are faster. Your weapons are powerful, but we have had time to analyze them and develop countermeasures." She gestured to someone off-screen, and the display behind her changed to show tactical information. Korath recognized the schematics of his own flagship, annotated with weak points and vulnerabilities that even he had not known about. "Our analysts have been very thorough," Beth continued. "We know the power output of your shields. We know the range of your weapons. We know where your fuel lines run and where your reactor cores are located. We know everything." Admiral Korath gripped the arms of his command chair. "How? How could you know all of this?" "Because we have been preparing for this day since we first detected your empire's existence. We knew that eventually, someone would come to conquer us. We knew that we would seem weak and primitive. We knew that you would underestimate us." Beth leaned forward. "We were counting on it." Silence fell over the bridge of the Eternal Vengeance. The tactical display showed his 800 ships, surrounded and outgunned. For the first time in his long career, Admiral Korath did not know what to do. "Admiral," Beth said, her voice softening. "I meant what I said earlier. This is your one chance to turn around and go home. No shots fired. No lives lost. Just a lesson learned." Korath looked at the display again. His fleet was powerful, but the humans had numbers, position, and preparation on their side. If he gave the order to attack, some of his ships might survive. Most would not. Supreme Commander Zelthos had warned him not to underestimate these humans. Korath had not listened. Now he was paying the price. "What happens if we refuse?" he asked quietly. Beth shrugged. "Then we fight. And Admiral, I promise you, we are very, very good at fighting. We have been practicing on each other for thousands of years." She paused. "But I hope it does not come to that. War is wasteful. We would much rather make friends than enemies." Admiral Korath closed his 4 eyes and made the only decision he could make. "All ships," he ordered, "stand down." The surrender of the Velkorian First Fleet was the fastest in galactic history. Within 3 hours, every warship had powered down its weapons and accepted human escort to a holding area near Jupiter. Admiral Korath and his senior officers were transferred to a human station, where they were given comfortable quarters, regular meals, and access to something the humans called a recreation center. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The mighty Velkorian Empire, conquerors of 47 worlds, masters of the known stars, had been stopped cold by a species that most had never heard of. Diplomats and spies from a dozen civilizations rushed to learn more about these humans who had somehow turned the tables on the greatest military power in existence. Supreme Commander Zelthos received the news in his private chambers. He sat in silence for a long time, staring at the report without really seeing it. 800 ships. Gone. Not destroyed, which would have at least been honorable, but captured. Taken without a single shot fired. His fleet had been surrounded, outnumbered, and outsmarted by creatures that his advisors had described as primitive. A soft chime announced a visitor. Zelthos did not respond, but the door opened anyway. Ambassador Jake Morrison walked in, carrying 2 steaming cups. He wore the same simple gray suit he had worn in the council chamber. The same friendly smile was on his face. "I hope you do not mind the intrusion," Jake said, setting one of the cups on the table beside Zelthos. "I brought hot chocolate. My wife Katie makes it from an old family recipe. She says it helps when you are feeling down." Zelthos looked at the cup, then at the human. "You come to gloat?" "Not at all." Jake sat down in a chair across from the Supreme Commander. "I came to talk. I think we have a lot to discuss." "What is there to discuss?" "You have defeated us. You have humiliated the Empire in front of the entire galaxy. Our reputation is destroyed." Jake sipped his drink slowly. "Your reputation as conquerors? Perhaps. But is that really the reputation you want?" Zelthos stared at him. "What do you mean?" "I have studied your history, Supreme Commander. The Velkorian Empire began as a collection of farming communities on your homeworld. Your people developed civilization, built cities, created art, and music, and literature. For thousands of years, you grew and learned and explored. The conquests only started later, when you encountered other species who seemed threatening." Jake set down his cup. "You were afraid. You met aliens for the first time, and they seemed strange and dangerous. So you attacked them before they could attack you. And when that worked, you kept attacking. You conquered world after world because it felt safer than taking risks. Somewhere along the way, you forgot that there were other options." Zelthos said nothing, but his 4 eyes were watching the human with new attention. "Humanity has walked that same path," Jake continued. "We know what it is like to fear the unknown. We know what it is like to attack first and ask questions later. We have done terrible things to each other in the name of safety and security." He smiled sadly. "But we have also learned something important. Something that took us a very long time to understand." "And what is that?" "Destroying your enemies does not make you safe, it just creates new enemies. The children and grandchildren of those you defeat grow up hating you. They plot revenge. They wait for their chance to strike back. You can conquer 100 worlds, but you can never truly be at peace, because there is always someone waiting in the shadows." Jake picked up his cup again. "We tried the conquest approach for most of our history. It never worked. Every empire we built eventually fell. Every enemy we destroyed was replaced by 2 more. We were trapped in an endless cycle of violence and revenge." Zelthos thought about his own empire. About the rebellions that required constant military attention. About the conquered species who resisted even after generations of occupation. About the resources wasted on maintaining control of worlds that would never truly accept Velkorian rule. "So what is the alternative?" he asked quietly. "Partnership," Jake said simply. "Cooperation, trade, cultural exchange, treating other species as potential friends rather than potential threats." He leaned forward. "Do you know why we did not destroy your fleet, Supreme Commander? Why we captured those ships instead of blowing them out of the sky? Tell me." "Because dead soldiers cannot become friends, but living ones can." Jake smiled. "Right now, Admiral Korath is learning how to play basketball. Several of your officers have discovered that they enjoy human music. Your engineers are fascinated by our cooking technology. In just a few days, your people have started to see us as individuals, rather than enemies. Zelthos considered this. It was true that the reports from the captured fleet had been strange. His officers did not sound like prisoners. They sounded almost content. One had even asked if he could remain on the human station to continue studying their literature. You could conquer the galaxy, Zelthos said. With your fleet, your technology, your preparation. You could take everything. Probably, Jake agreed. But why would we want to? Have you ever tried running an empire, Supreme Commander? The paperwork alone would kill us. He laughed softly. Seriously, we have seen your bureaucracy. No, thank you. Despite himself, Zelthos felt the corner of his mouth twitch upward. It was almost a smile. Here is what humanity actually wants, Jake said. Trade partners who will buy our goods and sell us theirs. Cultural exchange so we can learn new ideas and share our own. Scientific collaboration so we can solve problems together. And occasionally, someone new to play games with. We have invented thousands of games over our history. We are always looking for new players. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. The galaxy does not need more conquerors, Supreme Commander. It has had plenty of those. What it needs is builders, teachers, partners. He turned back to face Zelthos. Humanity is offering the Velkorian Empire a choice. You can continue down the path of conquest and eventually meet the same fate as every empire before you. Or you can try something new. Zelthos looked at his hot chocolate, still untouched on the table. He picked it up and took a small sip. The taste was strange but not unpleasant. Sweet and warm and somehow comforting. What would this partnership look like? He asked. Jake Morrison smiled, and for the first time, Zelthos understood why the human had seemed so confident in the council chamber. It was not arrogance. It was hope. Let me tell you, Jake said. 1 year had passed since the war that never was. The Velkorian homeworld looked different now. Human engineers worked alongside Velkorian scientists in new research facilities, combining the best of both species' knowledge to solve problems that neither could have solved alone. Trade ships moved freely between Earth and the former empire, carrying goods and ideas in both directions. Music from 100 worlds played in public squares where soldiers had once marched. Ambassador Zelthos, as he now preferred to be called, stood on a balcony overlooking the capital city. He still wore the robes of his office, but they were lighter now, more comfortable. The weight that had pressed down on his shoulders for so many centuries had finally begun to lift. Jake Morrison joined him on the balcony, carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate. It had become something of a tradition between them. Beautiful morning, Jake said, handing over one of the cups. Zelthos accepted it with a nod. The drink had grown on him over the past year. His personal staff had even learned how to make it properly, though Jake insisted that his wife Katie's recipe was still the best. I received a report from the Outer Territories this morning, Zelthos said. The species we once conquered are responding well to the reforms. Several have already established trade agreements with human merchants. That is good news. Jake leaned against the railing. How are your people taking the changes? Quote. 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 It was a fair question. Not everyone in the former empire had accepted the new order easily. Some of the old generals still grumbled about honor and tradition. A few had even tried to organize resistance movements, but they were a shrinking minority. Better than I expected, Zelthos admitted. The young ones especially. They are curious about humans. They want to learn your languages, study your history, play your games. He paused. There is a Velkorian youth league now, for something called soccer. They are quite enthusiastic about it. Jake laughed. Soccer has that effect on people. Just wait until they discover baseball. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city below. It was strange, Zelthos thought, how quickly things could change. A year ago, He had been planning the conquest of Earth. Now he was planning a joint expedition to explore uncharted regions of the galaxy, with human and Velkorian crews working together. "Can I ask you something?" Zelthos said. "Of course. That day in the council chamber, when I declared war, you were never really afraid, were you?" Jake considered the question carefully. "Afraid for myself? No. I knew our fleet was in position. I knew we were ready." He looked down at his cup. "But I was afraid of something else. I was afraid that we would have to fight. That all, our preparation would mean nothing because we would be forced to destroy each other instead of becoming friends. You truly wanted peace even then." "Yes." Jake met his eyes. "Supreme Commander, I have studied history my entire life. I have read about wars and conquests and empires that rose and fell, and I have learned one truth above all others. Violence is easy. Building something that lasts is hard. Destruction is fast. Creation takes time." He smiled. "Humanity has gotten very good at violence over the years, but we are trying to get better at peace." A shuttle descended toward a landing platform nearby. Jake recognized the markings of his personal transport. "I have to get going," he said. "The dedication ceremony for the new space station starts in a few hours. Are you coming?" Zelthos nodded. "I would not miss it." The space station orbited at the midpoint between Earth and the Velkorian homeworld. It was called Unity Station, a name chosen by a joint committee of humans and Velkorians working together. The structure itself was massive. A ring of metal and glass that sparkled against the blackness of space. Docking ports allowed ships from both species to come and go freely. Inside, laboratories, meeting rooms, living quarters, and recreation areas provided space for thousands of residents. Jake stood on the observation deck, watching the dedication ceremony through the transparent walls. Officials from both governments were giving speeches, cutting ribbons, and shaking hands for the cameras. It was the kind of political theater that he had never enjoyed, but today he did not mind. His daughter Lily was there, running around with a group of children that included several young Velkorians. She had grown up so fast over the past year, 12 years old now, tall for her age, with her mother's brown hair and her father's stubborn streak. She was teaching the Velkorian kids how to throw a softball, and they were teaching her their own games in return. Ambassador Zelthos walked up beside him. The former Supreme Commander watched the children play with an expression that Jake could not quite read. "They do not see enemies," Zelthos said quietly. "They just see playmates." "Children often see more clearly than adults," Jake replied. Zelthos was silent for a moment. Then he asked the question that had been bothering him since that first day in the council chamber. "The newspaper. When I declared war upon your species, and you simply stood there reading a newspaper. Was that a strategy? A psychological technique to unnerve me?" Jake laughed. "No, nothing so clever. I really was checking on Lily's softball game. Her team was in the regional finals that week." He pulled out his wallet and showed Zelthos a photograph. "They won, by the way. She hit the winning run." Zelthos stared at the photo. A young human girl in a sports uniform, covered in dirt, grinning from ear to ear. Her teammates surrounded her, celebrating. "You truly were more concerned about your daughter's game than my declaration of war?" "Of course." Jake tucked the photo away. "Supreme Commander, your threats were frightening. Your fleet was impressive. Your power was real. But at the end of the day, you were just one more problem to be solved. My daughter's happiness, her future, her smile when she succeeds at something she loves. That is what matters. That is what we were actually fighting to protect." The ceremony was ending now. Music played through the station's speakers, a combination of human and Velkorian compositions that somehow worked together. People of both species began to mingle, talking and laughing and sharing food. Jake clapped Zelthos on the shoulder. "Come on, old friend. The barbecue is starting, and I promise to teach you how humans celebrate making new allies." As they walked toward the festivities, the stars stretched out before them through the station's windows. No longer a battlefield to be conquered, but a neighborhood to be explored. Together, Lily ran up to Jake and grabbed his hand. Dad, can Tessic come to my birthday party next month? I want to show him Earth. Jake smiled at the young Velkorian who had followed his daughter. A year ago, that same child had probably been preparing to celebrate human extinction. Now he was being invited to a birthday party. Of course he can, Jake said. I think there is room for a lot more friends in our future. The stars seemed brighter somehow as they walked together toward the celebration. Two species that had almost destroyed each other now building something new. Something that might just last forever.